Welcome everybody to Public Sociology Live. Today is the 9th conversation and we are delighted to welcome Michel Wieviorka to our global course. Michel was for a long time head of the Sociological Intervention Research Unit at the EHESS, that's the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, one of the most important research centers in France. This unit was originally founded by world-renowned French sociologist Alain Touraine. Michel was also president, he was my predecessor actually, as president of the International Sociological Association and has now ascended to the major post as head of France's main research enterprise in the human sciences, the Fondation Maison des Sciences de l'Homme, where he is developing many interesting projects, many interesting global projects. He is the author of many books, most of them dealing with the dark side of society: racism, anti-Semitism, violence, terrorism, and antisocial movements. He has a forthcoming book in English called Evil. He says that, in fact, in order to promote the good, you need to understand the bad. In that sense, you might say he is the prototype, indeed the prototype of the sociologist. Tim, can we have him on? Thank you. But evil actually is not the only thing he has studied. I myself am very fond of the book he wrote with his colleagues on Polish solidarity movement of 1980-81. This was an amazing eruption of civil society that sought to renew, or rather transform, Polish communism. Interestingly, the authors enter into a discussion with the militants of the workers' movement, helping them understand its possibilities while providing a fascinating analysis of its evolution. But, and this is the most important for our course, Michel is renowned for bringing sociology to publics. He created his own monthly magazine, Monde des Débats, no longer in existence, I believe, and he now writes for many newspapers in France, is a frequent commentator on social and political issues on radio and television and through his books. Indeed, Michel Wieviorka is a household name in the French literate public. We might say there is really no comparable sociologist or even social scientist in a country such as the United States. And that perhaps says something about Michel, but also perhaps something about France. Indeed, when we look down the list of public sociologists as we have talked to so far, Castells, Sunda, Garavito, Fletcher and Soler, Bellow, von Holt and Hanafi, none have achieved the national presence of Michel Wieviorka. So, let us welcome Michel Wieviorka, public sociologist extraordinaire. So, Michel, we have 15 minutes from you, and what we want to know is how on earth you are such a magnificent public sociologist.
Well, you are too nice with me. Hello, everybody. You are very nice with me. I do my job, and I consider that my job includes two main dimensions. On the one hand, produce knowledge, and this is not public. This is, I would say, private or personal. And then diffuse knowledge. I mean, make it useful to as many people as possible, which means that I am not so far from the spirit of the Enlightenment. I believe that the more you know, the clever you are, the better you are, and the better is society, which is not maybe always the truth, because maybe knowledge is not necessary progress. But I am like that. And as a sociologist, I have been making a lot of research, fieldwork, some of them, or part of them, using this methodology, which is called sociological intervention. Sociological intervention, which was invented by Alain Touraine, is not in itself public sociology. It's sociology where sociologists and social actors co-produce knowledge. We produce knowledge together. I have no time to present you this methodology. It's a long story. There are lots of books. Some of them have been translated into English. For instance, this book about solidarity. But the work in itself is not public. We work together. There is no audience. We don't communicate immediately after each meeting of the groups that we are working with, and so on. What becomes public, it is when the process of producing knowledge is finishing. At that moment, a very important test of what we do is what other social actors, that the very limited number of people that we have been working with, other people but members of the same kind of action, what do they do with the knowledge that have been produced with a limited number of people? To be clear, if I work in Poland with 10 or 20 or 30 activists that participate in Solidarity, then if I have the opportunity to present this analysis to other members of Solidarity, not the ones that participated in the research, but other people, the test will be what they do with the results. And here maybe begins public sociology. But then public sociology will have nothing to do anymore with sociological intervention. It will be diffusing its result, discussing with other people its result. So in itself, what I want to say, in itself, sociological intervention is a very interesting methodology. It's maybe the only one that have been created by some social scientists, the real new methodology during the last 50 years. Maybe, or one of the very few. But it is not public sociology in itself. What is public sociology, from my point of view, is when I take my results or results of sociological work and I discuss it, I present it to other people than the ones that have been involved in the process of producing knowledge. I hope I am clear. Is it okay for you, Michael?
Very clear, very clear.
Okay. So maybe I could say a few words. I've done a lot of research like that, and there is maybe a very interesting question. When I am working with Solidarity members, these are wonderful people, good people. So if I consider that knowledge will make these people and other people better, you have good people and you make them better. It's wonderful. But I have been also working with terrorists. I have been working with racist people. I have been working with anti-Semitic people and so on. So I produced knowledge with these people. Should I consider that producing this kind of knowledge will help terrorist activities, racist activities, anti-Semitic prejudice, and so on? Of course not. But it is not as easy to think, because I produce knowledge on racism, for instance. Who is this knowledge going to help to become better? It's a real issue. I don't want to give a solution. I just want to raise this issue. Then what you said, Michael, is absolutely right. I am somebody who participates in the public life. The French like to be considered, the French sociologists, most of them like to be considered as intellectuals. This is maybe very different than what is happening in your country. In France, a good sociologist would like to be considered as an intellectual. Maybe in the US, a good sociologist should not like to be considered as an intellectual.
Right.
So if I write in Le Monde, the newspaper, or if I write on a in an online journal, or if I am invited in TV program or in radio program and so on, for me, it means that I am a sociologist who is part of the world of intellectuals, which I like. Maybe in your country, it would not be exactly the same. So I sent you this question back to you. So I have done this. I launched 12 years ago a magazine which was called, as you said, Le Monde des Débats. The problem is that after 2 or 3 years, there was no more money. And what is very interesting, that I visited the Nouvel Observateur, which is the most important left magazine in France. And I told to the boss, listen, to the boss, to the financial boss. Listen, I need money. I have no more money. And he said, okay, but you are no longer the director. The new director will be my good friend Jean Daniel, the intellectual director of Le Nouvel Observateur. I said, okay, I have no choice. I will be number 2. It's okay. But after 6 months, it was not possible anymore to work with Jean Daniel, and it was the end of the Monde des Débats. So I had a bad experience there. What else? Well, this is maybe what I can tell you. Maybe a few words about my relations with politicians, if you want. Okay? I am a good friend with many people that are part of the Socialist Party. I am myself not part of the Socialist Party. I have no card of any political party. I never had any card. But I am what in the past people would have called compagnon de route, which was used, an expression which was used for intellectual close to the Communist Party. So I am a compagnon de route of the Socialist Party. So 2 years ago, and I am a personal friend of Martine Aubry, who is now the number 1 in the Socialist Party. She ran to be the candidate of her party, but she lost 6 months ago, and so she's not the candidate. She lost at the primary that we had, and she's not the candidate. So she's just a leader of the party, but not the candidate for the French presidential election. So when she was elected at number 1 in her party 3 years ago, I discussed with her, and we decided to promote the idea of what we called the laboratory of ideas. And my idea, and she accepted, was that we could have together, in a certain number of groups, people working together. There was one condition. I said, it is interesting if in one group, on the one hand, you have intellectual, including sociologists, but not only, and also political actors, deputies, member of the staff of the Socialist Party, whatever, political actors, and social scientists or intellectuals. It is not interesting if you have only politicians. It is not interesting if you have only sociology. So I try to promote this idea. Let me tell you that it did not work so well. This is my personal conclusion. And let me tell you that a public sociologist, if you want to call me like that, will never really succeed in exerting a strong influence through his analysis in a political party. The only real case I know where where politicians listen to sociologists, the only real case I know is in England, Tony Blair listening to Anthony Giddens. You should interview Anthony Giddens, Michael.
Yes.
But usually,
Tony Giddens, he became a lord.
Yeah, so it might be now difficult. But usually when you discuss in private with politicians, they know much more sociology than you. Because a good politician in my country is somebody who is, for instance, the mayor of the city and a member of parliament. You can be both of them. So when he is in the city, every day people knock at his door or her door and say, I have this problem, I have that problem, would you help me to do this, I would like that, and so on and so on. So these people see a lot of people. They know what is the real life of the people. And then when they arrive at the parliament, they read a lot of reports, they listen to a lot of things, they know a lot. And you can have private discussions with these people. They are wonderful. They understand everything. They agree with you if you are solid. But after the meeting, they go back home and they forget what you have been discussing because their main interest is not to admit that such or such analysis is interesting. Their main interest is what my constituency will think, what my electors, I can say that, what the voters will think of what I say. And voters don't expect sociological analysis to be right. Voters have other ideas or other demands and so on. So my experience is that it's always interesting to discuss with politicians, but it does not help so much if you want them to change their mind or to have a new policy.
Very good.
Very nice. Thanks.
Very good. Okay, well, why don't we end there? Just thanks very much, Michel. That's great. So we've given us a broad outlook on public sociology, and quite clearly distinguishing it from the idea of what I would call an organic public sociology, which is indeed what you'll call a co-production of knowledge. And so what we need to do now is to interrogate Michel on precisely these problems of what it means to convey to public sociological knowledge. So who would like to begin? Dominica.
Well, thank you very much for your talk. You said that public sociology begins when the knowledge that is produced is actually validated by the publics. So I was wondering if this was the case in your research on solidarity, if this research was more than just sociological intervention.
Well, it is not a very good example of public sociology starting with a sociological intervention, because first of all, we were a French and Polish team working in Poland. And as you can imagine, it's more easy to make public sociology in your country than in another country. That's the first point. Then, I think there was some dimension of public sociology because there were a lot of interviews, debates, presentation before and after this, the end of solidarity, and that till now, this research exists in the public sphere in Poland. I can tell you, for instance, I've been invited recently to go to Gdansk in Poland. I have been asked to give my archives, a copy of my archives, to some institution. I mean, it's part of the general life of the country, but so far from what we did 30 years ago, then I would not call this really public sociology. Let me give you another example of a sociological intervention, which is really public sociology. In the late 70s, with Alain Touraine, we made a very big sociological intervention with many groups and so on the anti-nuclear protest, the movement, anti-nuclear movement. And one of the main results of this research was the idea that the problem is not that nuclear energy is dangerous. The conclusion of activists and sociologists together producing some knowledge was that the problem was much more democracy, the way technocracy decide to impose nuclear energy in a country. So this was the idea. So the idea was we should not fight, for the activists, we should not fight with the idea that the nuclear energy is dangerous, we should fight in name of democracy. And then we went to many places where there were activists, not the ones that we have been working with, and we started to discuss with them. But then there was this, I don't remember exactly when, this famous accident in your country, which was called 3 Mile Island. It was a plant, a nuclear plant, with some problems, and there was some radioactivity in the air, and this. And immediately, when this accident became important and was discussed in the French media, the anti-nuclear movement, not the 20 or 30 people that we have been working with, but the whole movement decided to have a big meeting. And they had this meeting and they started to say, what do we do with this event? And what is very interesting is that most of the people started to say, we shall say that nuclear energy is very dangerous. But then, we sociologists and the very small number of activists that had been working with us, we went to discuss this idea and we told them, to the general movement, our research suggests not to use this idea of it is dangerous, and much more to say it is not democratic to impose to a country this kind of energy without any debate, without any democratic process. So here, it's a better example than the example with solidarity.
And how successful were you?
It worked. It worked, and the campaign they launched was on this idea. The problem is that technocrats use their monopoly of knowledge in technical things, in economy, and so on, to impose a program without any democratic debate. And it can lead to accidents. But it was a campaign that was really connected with our research, really.
Very good.
But we still have nuclear plants in France, as you may know.
Ah, yes.
It's something
And
else.
in Japan too, where of course they're generating us. Sociologists are involved in a similar debate now. In Japan, yeah.
Yeah,
Of course.
Japan. For me, I could go to Japan and say, of course, it's a drama and so on. But for me today, the problem is, do you accept that without any democracy, some technocrats and owners of a big company, big capitalist and so on, can promote this kind of energy in such awful conditions? The problem is not only the drama or the possibility of a new drama, so the problem is who is ruling this sector of our life.
Right. Very good. So, who would like to ask another question? Anybody? What? Andrew?
I was just going to ask, in your work you talk about how through public sociology, the public validates the sociological knowledge that you come to. So, in regard to what you just were talking about, how did the public validate your findings in that public debate about nuclear energy?
Well, that's a very good question. Everything depends on what do you mean by the public. If you mean the public is made of social actors that are concerned with what you have been working on, it is not the same that if you say the public is everybody in the country. So I consider that the kind of public sociology I try to do, of course, I talk to the general public, the general audience, but much more important is to be able to discuss with people that are concerned by personally in their life, in their activism, in their demands, people that are really part of the game. So, for instance, we have been making a very big research with Alain Touraine in the early 80s on trade unions in France, on class consciousness. Michael knows this kind of issues better than I. We have been working on this, and we have been working all together maybe with 60 activists, because each group was made with 10 people, and in each group, and we had 6 or 7 groups. Then we visited the trade unions, and as you know, trade unions, it's thousands and thousands of people. We had discussions in many cities, in many different places, at the top, with rank and file people, and so on. This was our public. So it was not the general public, it was a very precise kind of actors. So for me, I would distinguish between general audience, which I try also to convince my analysis is good, and more precise sectors that are more directly concerned. Now, it is not because I made fieldwork, solid research, and so on, that people will accept my conclusions. Sometimes they will say yes, sometimes they will say no. And here there is something which is very interesting. So just imagine that I produce some knowledge and that I am in front of a group of 200 activists somewhere, okay? And I say, these are the results of my research. Do you agree with my research and with my research? Then you will have different possibilities. maybe people will say, okay, we agree. And now we have agreed, let us talk of something else. We don't want to discuss with you, in fact. We agree, but they don't do anything with what you have said, and they just don't want to discuss with you. It is not because people say yes that you have really tested, that you have really demonstrated something. Now, and people can have very bad reasons to say, yes, I agree. And when people say, no, I disagree, then it's very interesting because you try to say, why do you disagree? And you insist and you say why you propose this and that. And the good demonstration is when people resist to your analysis, that you discuss it, you present your argument, your ideas, and so on, and that at the end they say, okay, and not only they agree, but they say, oh, it's very interesting, I will do something with what you say. For me, the real test is when people say, okay, I will use your analysis in order to be stronger in my action. This is the real test. But it is not everybody. It is not all the public. It's some people among other people.
Andrew, you satisfied with that response? Very good. Kaylee. Yeah, you just yeah.
Hi. I'm curious to piggyback on that question. When you meet resistance from your public and they say no and they sort of invalidate your research, and then you continue on to, I guess in a way, convince them that your research is legitimate, doesn't that take away any aspect of dialogue within that research process?
There is dialogue. I'm not sure I understand well, but the research process is full of dialogues. This kind of research, it's hours and hours of debates, dialogue. There are at certain moments that we organize dialogue between the actors we are working with and their adversaries or their friends or other people. At some moment we introduce analysis and we tell to the group we are working with, this is our analysis of your action. What do you think of what we think, and so on. So there are many moments of dialogue. And there is a moment when things don't change. You understand that things are like that and they will not be very different even if you discuss more. And at that moment, you can consider that your research is finished. So dialogue, there is a lot of dialogue. And sometimes it can be hours and hours. So sometimes I've been working with a small group of 10 people during altogether 80 hours, 100 hours. And then when we go and meet other people, of course we don't spend so much time, but we spend a lot of time to discuss. And this is why, of course, we could have more dialogue, but I think that public sociology means a lot of dialogue, a lot of debates. I want to give you another example, which is very funny. One day, we made a very big research, as I told you, on the working class consciousness. And at the end of the research, it was clear that we could summarize our ideas with a kind of thing written on a paper with different points. And we were discussing so much that instead of saying that there is this at that point and that, no, we said point number 1, point number 2, point number 3, 4, 5. There were 6 places on our design. And at the end of the research, I was invited at the Congress of one of the French main trade unions, which is called CFDT. And I was invited as a guest at this Congress, and I was sitting next to some members of the working group that I've been organizing before. And the leader, the number 1 of the trade union, Edmond Maire, came and started to make a big discourse. And the guy who was just next to me was telling me, he's now at point 1. He will try to go from point 1 to point 4. He will not be able to do it because we tried, and it was true that, so they were listening the discourse of the leader using the categories that we had been inventing together in the research and pointing exactly the points, the moments where the leader will have some problems because the group had this kind of theoretical problem. So it was very funny to see that a sociological analysis, which was now part of the, which belonged also to these trade unionists, this analysis was useful for them to understand better the discourse of their big leader.
Yeah. Kaylee, you're not happy?
No.
No, come on.
What are you not happy about?
I mean, if I could make an example. So if I want to go and do this co-production of knowledge with the public, and I want to talk about racism, and I come up with some sort of hypothesis about racism, and I go in and I say, do you think this is, do you agree or do you disagree? And they say, no, we disagree. But they may be disagreeing just on the basis that people don't want to talk about racism. And so if I go beyond that to try to convince them that this is actually something relevant and this is actually something going on, isn't that just me reproducing this sort of elitism within public sociology, where I go in with my idea and I push it until they finally say okay, and in that there isn't really a dialogue.
Okay, I will answer. Okay, because I have made a lot of research with racist people. Now, how did I do, and what were the results?
Very good.
If I knock at the door of somebody and I suspect this person is a racist, is I say to this person, I am making fieldwork on racism, I know that you are a racist, will you participate? Of course, nobody will participate. Now, if I knock at the door of this person, I say, I am making a research on migrants and including racism. But so I don't say that there is no, I don't say that there is no racism in the research, but I don't make it the center of what I say. I would like to understand better, if you say that, I would like to understand better why there is so much racism towards migrants. Would you participate in my work? Some people will say yes. So I did it. And I organized a group. I have several times groups of people that were more or less racist. And what was unbelievable is during the process, they were more and more conscious that they were trying to analyze the fact that they became more and more racist during the last 5 or 10 years. They were conscious of this. The problem is what happened. I will give one example. At the end of the life of one of these groups, during 50 or 80 hours with the same people during weeks and weeks in a very poor neighborhood in the north of France, in a city called Roubaix. We have been with these people, with my research team, and it was clear that they understood why they became racist. So they became able to propose with us, sociologists, a kind of analysis of how people become racist. And it was clear. But on the very last day of the research, it was a Saturday, during the afternoon, it was the last moment, suddenly, after demonstrating that they understood very well how they became racist, and so they became less and less racist, because they understood that the social reasons that made them racist. So at the very end of the process, suddenly, one woman in the group started to use racist expressions as never in this group. And not only this woman, but other members of the group. And during 1 hour, we were, at the sociology, we were totally stuck, I don't know, like that, panic-stricken, because at the very end of the research, they were more racist than ever. And then we came back to Paris, and the day after, I had 40, I was very ill, and so, fever, and so. So now, how do I understand what happened? Now it's clear for me. I understand that we should have done much more public sociology with these people. Why? You work with poor people. They understand with you the social mechanisms through which they become more and more racist. They understand it. And then at the end of the process, you tell them, now bye-bye, I go back to Paris, to the Latin Quarter, in my car, I will go back to my wonderful place where I live, and I leave you, poor people, in your awful situation. So these people, my interpretation is that these people wanted me to pay the fact that they had been able to analyze their problems, but that nothing has changed. And the problem is very important. The problem is you cannot finish a research at that stage. Now, I try to answer to what you said. Now I think that if I have more time, and I should have taken more time, it's now that I say, I could have tried to go down to the real life of these people and maybe organize other things with them in order to see if I can help them not only theoretically, but maybe also practically. Because maybe I could organize a meeting with the mayor of the city so that, I don't know, they make some improvement in the lodging or in the gardens or in the school or whatever. So we did not do that. So my answer is that when people understand better the reasons of their awful situation, it's important. But if you don't bring any chance that things change, then you produce more and not less racism. But then this research was highly mediatized, I can say that, with a lot of newspapers, TV, and so on. For instance, at the end of that, I wrote a book, the title of which was La France raciste, Racist France. And this book was it worked very well. I sold maybe, 15,000 copies or something like that. And I was invited to very big TV programs, very important, very popular ones. And so I could explain a certain number of things. And as a public sociologist, explaining a certain number of things about racism could be useful, not for racist people. They don't change their mind because their situation does not change necessarily. But politicians, local political actors, people working in NGOs, people working, social workers, and so on, I think that what we did could be helpful for them in order to improve their way of dealing with people that are maybe more or less racist. So this is my more precise answer. Is it better now?
Yes.
Kaylee says yes. Good, thanks. That was a very nice sort of overview of a real case. I mean, are there cases that you say that the interesting moment is that when you take back to the public the results of your research, and after all, your research is, what is your research? I mean, it's about racism, anti-Semitism, violence, terrorism. These are very sort of sensitive topics. You take it back to publics, and then they say, well, no, we don't agree with you. Have you got cases where you're able actually to change their minds?
Can I give you a very recent example?
I would love to hear one, yeah.
5 years ago, I published a book which was the result of a very, very big fieldwork on anti-Semitism in France. It was translated into English. The title in English is The Lure of Anti-Semitism. It's a big, big fieldwork. And if my analysis was right, the fact was clear, there could be a decline of anti-Semitism in France. There is still anti-Semitism, but there is a decline. Okay, it was the beginning of the decline at that time, because there was a peak in the late 90s. And then my result demonstrated that we were living at the beginning of the decline. Now, maybe you have heard that 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, in the city of Toulouse, south of France, a crazy Islamic radical guy, after murdering three French soldiers, a few days after, killed 3 children and a professor in a Jewish school. Maybe you have heard of this event.
Yeah.
And so, public sociology. I did not do anything myself. I never take my telephone to ask to a journal I would like to be interviewed and so on. I never do that. So I received a telephone call from Le Monde, which is the best French daily newspaper, and they told me, we want to interview you about this problem and about anti-Semitism in France. And I said, I consider this as a terrible story, but this phenomenon, this story, is, I don't know the English word, a contre-courant, going on the opposite side, on the opposite tendency of the French situation. I consider that there is less and less anti-Semitism in France, even if events like this can happen. I was the only person in France that could say that, because nobody will suspect me to have anything with anti-Semitic people. Nobody, and people know that I have made this fieldwork, and so public sociology in this precise case meant I could give an interview, which was very well published in Le Monde, to say this does not mean that there is a sudden rise general of anti-Semitism. So sociological analysis, which was made 5 or 6 years ago, helped me to propose something which could be accepted in a general climate where most of the people were going to think that there was a rise in anti-Semitism in France because of these murders. Is it a good example?
That's a very good example. I said we don't actually know what effect your actual article in Le Monde actually had, right? You could.
I have some. Some people react.
Yes, but people could say, of course, there's another sociologist who says there's a decline in anti-Semitism. We know the sociologists are full of nonsense.
I have an answer for you.
Okay.
A few days after that, I wrote an article. I decided to write an article for another newspaper, which is called Libération. And in this article, I said not only this, but I said something which is part also of my research. I said, but it was also highly political. It's very interesting. Sarkozy, in his campaign, is saying that he likes the idea of République, which means that in the public sphere there should be no minority, only individuals. Okay. Sarkozy said that there should be no room for communities, minorities in the public sphere. Okay. But then he's going to visit the Jewish community, to support the Jewish community, and so on, after such a drama. So I published, in the newspapers during the last time, I had one interview in Le Monde and this article in Libération. And then, after that, I was invited on a very big TV program, channel number 3, a very popular channel. And here your question, Michael. And on this, it was a debate, and there was a journalist working at Le Figaro, very right-wing journal, but very newspaper, but very important. And the guy started to say, it's because some people are like you, sociologists, that we have this kind of dramas. You are guilty. People like you help radical Islam to develop in France. And my analysis was attacked, and I was attacked as a sociologist promoting this kind of analysis and creating the problems. So you are discussing now with somebody who is guilty of Islamism, radical Islam, murdering Jews, and so this was what happened. So public sociology is sometimes a nightmare. It's not always very pleasant.
Yes. Well, you must experience this all the time, given the sorts of groups that you do research on, right? Did you have your hand up, Micah? Yeah.
So you mentioned several times that the knowledge produced by sociologists raises the ability for action among the people being studied and also society as a whole. But you also explicitly insist that the sociologist is not an activist, and I was just wondering why that's so important to you.
Because I consider that sociological analysis, you can hear me?
Yep, yep.
Yeah, okay. I consider that sociological analysis can never be exactly what actors say and think. That there is always a certain distance between what we can say as social scientists and what social actors can say and think. And I consider that my job is to be on one side of this distance. If I am also an activist, I will become one of these organic intellectuals, and sooner or later, I will have to promote my party, my NGO, my trade union, my group, which I don't want to do. So if I want to be considered as a sociologist, and if I want to be able to consider myself as such, I must not be an actor, which does not mean that I have the same feeling towards actors. Of course, I will be very far from racist, anti-Semitic, terrorist, and whatever. Of course, I will have some sympathy for trade unionists. And among trade unionists, I will have more sympathy for some kind of trade unionism and for another one. But I have to be, my role in my work is not to become a trade unionist or to become this or that. And let me add something. When you work with real actors, usually they like you not to try to be like them. They like you because you are bringing something distinct, something different. This is why you are interesting. If you are just like them, well, of course, you can help them. You can give them the feeling that they are stronger. But it is not so useful, and they know that. Most of the actors that I have known are very happy when they can really work with social scientists.
Yep. Yes, Michel.
Yes.
Hmm?
His name is also Michel. It's fine.
Ah, yes, yes. we have a student here called Michel. Sorry, it was Michel,
excuse
Mrs.
me.
Michel. Okay.
Professors Von Holt and Hanafi recently joined us, and both their arguments touched on how rights discourses such as racial rights in South Africa and Palestinian rights in the diaspora can also be used in oppressive ways. And I'm wondering, it sounds like you would agree with this. Would it be accurate to say that you think that rights discourses of the Jewish diaspora and Palestinian diaspora can be used in emancipatory ways as well as racist, oppressive ways?
I'm sorry, I did not understand what you said. There is communication, but very bad. So can you say it again a little bit slower, maybe, because I had some difficulties.
Okay.
Louder.
Basically, I'm wondering.
I don't hear now.
Oh,
You don't hear us? Do you hear me?
I hear you perfectly, Michael.
Okay. Hmm? Ah, okay.
Or maybe you can say it again, Michael,
Right,
because
right.
I think that she's too far from the micro, or there's something.
Right. So I think the question is, that we had a number of people here before who, for example, your own student Sari Hanafi talked about rights, the importance of recognizing the rights of Palestinians, and he showed in some ways how, in fact, that rights discourse can actually be used and appropriated by those groups that he has not necessarily sympathy with or in a sense are antagonistic to the rights of Palestinians. Is there a problem, I think, in transmitting your sociological knowledge? You're not controlling exactly who will use it for what ends.
Or specifically,
Well,
Hold on.
specifically regarding rights of the diaspora, like Jewish rights, Palestinian rights, can those be used in oppressive ways?
Michelle is asking, can the rights of the discourse of rights be used in an oppressive manner against the groups whose rights we are proclaiming or are being proclaimed?
Well,
I think that
of course it is true. I will answer
I would say that,
like
you know,
that.
just to let you know, we've read one of your pieces. This question is coming on the piece that you wrote about racism and diasporas, in which you make the argument that the concept of diaspora has been, in many ways, an emancipatory thing for the Jewish diaspora. And so Michel is bringing up, you know, are there ways in which that concept can be not emancipatory as well, and in particular in terms of thinking about Palestinians?
Well, I am not a philosopher. I am a sociologist. And for me, the difference is the following one. A philosopher proposes concepts, ideas, more or less abstract. A sociologist proposes to articulate ideas, concepts, and real facts. This is why I like to be a sociologist. I like fieldwork and I like ideas, but I like to connect them. Now, some ideas, if you disconnect them from the use which is done, of course, you can imagine anything. You can imagine any. You can say, I give you another extreme example. If you say, for instance, the fascists in Italy or the Nazis in Germany were aware of economic growth and they built highways in their country. Does it mean that the concept of highway is Nazi? Of course not. It means that you can use an idea to do things which will be useful to awful people and not only for the good of everybody. It is the same with this discourse of human rights. I will defend human rights, but I will not defend them too abstractly. I will defend them when they are used by people that really want to promote them. Don't you remember, if we speak of human rights, that in not so far in the past, Gaddafi, Libya, was in charge of human rights in a committee at the United Nations. So, and don't you remember that the communist parties in the past, in the real communist countries, were speaking of democracy, were speaking of wonderful things in order to promote a totalitarian regime. So the problem is the problem is not the concept only. The problem is what do people do when using ideas, concept, and so on. So this is why I try to be a sociologist and to articulate what people say and what people do, what is abstract and what is real. If you don't do that, you will promote ideas, you will discuss ideas without knowing what is the reality. So this, I hope it's a clear answer.
Yep. Good. Yep. Anybody want to, perhaps this is the last question. Dominika.
I was actually wondering about your research on racism and anti-Semitism, whether it is, well, you did it in France, but would you say that it's applicable to the whole Europe? And how do you perceive in general like, the right-wing shift in Europe and the rise of maybe racial attitudes, or how would you perceive that?
Good question. When I did my first work on racism, the one I told you in France, a racist friend, after that I was thinking, is it the same in other European countries? So with my team, we visited 3 or 4 other countries and we make some comparison. But immediately there is a huge problem, and it's a conceptual problem. From a country to another country, the words that we use don't have exactly the same meaning, and sometimes there are huge differences. Let me give you just one example. In France, the political culture is such that we don't like the idea to promote ethnical distinctions. So if you say, I want to promote in the public sphere Arab culture, or this kind of thing, people will say, you are a racist. Then if you go to England, it's not so far, just the channel. If you go to England, if you say, I don't want to promote Arab culture, people say, you are a racist. So from the French culture to the English culture, Racism will be exactly the contrary. I exaggerate a little bit, of course, but you understand what I mean. The words don't have the same meaning, the same history. So it makes comparisons difficult. Now what I can tell you is that in Europe, very broadly speaking, there is a huge tendency to be anti-migrants, to be anti-Muslims. These are the main two issues. And this is strong on the extreme right, but not only. If you listen to David Cameron, then Angela Merkel, then Nicolas Sarkozy, all three leaders, right people, said exactly the same. Multiculturalism is a failure, which means I don't like Muslims and I don't like migrants. This is a translation in good English. It's not, the problem is not multiculturalism, it is. So there is a huge problem here, and this is European, but with big differences from a country to another one, which means that if you want to have a European view, you must go in each European country and maybe in different places within Europe, within each country. In France, for instance, it is well known that you have less racist voters for the National Front in Bretagne, west part of France, than in Alsace, eastern part of France. So you must also explain the local differences. So these are important issues. It's difficult to propose two general images. You must make fieldwork and as much as possible.
Well, that's very good. I'm afraid we have to come to an end. Our hour is up, but it's been really amazing, your extraordinary experience in doing different research and also bringing it to different publics and having dialogue with publics and sometimes being successful and sometimes not in changing their minds. It's really just shows the dilemmas of doing public sociology. So we are yes.
Could I don't want to have the last word, but I would like to add just one thing. It is not only the people that change their mind through research. It's also the sociologist himself. I can tell you that I am never the same at the end of a research that I was at the beginning of the research.
Well, then that means it's true dialogue, that we both sides change their perspectives. And so at the center of both your research and your public sociology is indeed the idea of dialogue. And actually we had a wonderful, from you know Ramon Fletcher and Marta Soler from Barcelona. They came to talk to us about their critical communicative methodology, which was also based on the idea of dialogue. But anyway, you brought to us an extraordinary wide range of research experience with different groups that really was very, very helpful in helping us figure out what public sociology might be. So thank you very much. Now, before we close, let me just tell the viewers, we have all these global viewers, that next week we're having a rest. It's a public sociology holiday. And the following week, we are going to a very different context, the Chinese context. The Chinese context is going to be brought to us by Poon Nai, a sociologist from Hong Kong who spends a lot of her time in Beijing. So that's going to be in 2 weeks' time. And so now let me thank you, Michel, from all of us for a wonderful seminar. Thank you very much.
All right.